You don't belong here." That was what the woman in the white linen blazer communicated without ever saying it out loud. In the way her eyes moved past Adunola Briggs-Zosi and continued moving, as though the space Adunola occupied was simply not worth registering. As though a woman in a wool blazer and dark travel slacks, seated in business class with a carry-on bag that cost more than most people's monthly rent, was still somehow a category error. A mistake the airline had made. A puzzle to be quietly solved. Adunola had flown enough to know the look. She had been receiving some version of it since she was 9 years old, and her mother had taken her on a Greyhound bus from Brampton to visit relatives in Windsor, and the woman in the seat across the aisle had moved her handbag to her lap and kept it there for 4 hours. The look had followed her through every room she had ever entered, that certain people decided she had no business being in. It had followed her through university, through her first office, through the boardroom of every company that had dismissed her early proposals and then, years later, sent emails requesting meetings she no longer had time to take. She had learned, over the years, to set it aside, not to suppress it, not to pretend it wasn't happening, but to place it somewhere peripheral, the way you place background noise when you are concentrating on something important. She was very good at concentrating on important things. Tonight, the important thing was getting from Toronto to Vancouver in time for a 7 a.m. breakfast with the CTO of a West Coast engineering firm she had been trying to bring into her orbit for the better part of 18 months. She had a window seat. She had a presentation she had revised 3 times on the cab to Pearson. She had, in the small cooler bag tucked under the seat in front of her, the dinner her assistant had packed, because Adunola had learned long ago that airline food at altitude made her focus drift in ways she could not afford. She was not thinking about the woman in the white linen blazer. And then the woman in the white linen blazer spoke. She had taken the aisle seat in Adunola's row, which was fine, which was nothing, which was the ordinary arithmetic of commercial flight. She had arranged herself with the particular deliberateness of someone accustomed to arranging spaces to suit herself. Jacket removed and folded, personal items stowed with an efficiency that suggested long practice. A small leather portfolio placed on the tray table, with a sound that was slightly too sharp to be accidental. She had the coiled energy of someone who was always, on some level, performing for an invisible audience. Her name, Adunola would learn later, was Pamela Croft. She was 47 years old, the principal of a mid-sized real estate consultancy based in Calgary, the kind of firm whose name appeared in regional business publications next to words like aggressive expansion and market disruption, and Pamela Croft's face, which was striking in the way of a woman who had made a long deliberate study of appearing striking, smiled out from those articles, with the confidence of someone who had never seriously questioned whether she deserved to be there. She had been on her phone since before boarding was complete. Her voice carried in the way of someone who had never been asked to lower it, and had therefore concluded that there was no reason to. She was speaking to someone about a deal that had fallen through, and her assessment of the people responsible was precise and unsparing and delivered at a volume that included everyone within 4 rows as involuntary witnesses. She finished the call, set the phone on the tray table beside the portfolio, and looked around the cabin with the appraising sweep of someone taking stock of an acquisition. Her gaze moved over Adunola. It moved past her. Meish on, then it returned. This was the thing that most people didn't understand about that particular kind of look. It wasn't always instant. Sometimes it was a second glance, a small recalibration, a quiet reclassification. The look that said, "I have placed you, and the category I've placed you in does not include this seat, this cabin, this conversation between people like me." Pamela Croft looked at the cooler bag under the seat in front of Adunola, and then at Adunola's boarding pass, which was sitting on the shared armrest between them. Then she looked at the flight attendant moving through the cabin with the practiced efficiency of someone doing 12 things simultaneously, and she raised her hand with the gesture of a woman who expected hands to be raised and noticed immediately. The flight attendant, a young man named Owen, whose lanyard identified him as crew member in training, stopped and smiled with genuine warmth. He asked what he could help with. Pamela Croft told him, in a voice that managed to be both pleasant and corrective, that there appeared to have been a seating error. She gestured vaguely in Adunola's direction. She said that she had specifically requested a window seat when she booked and that she wasn't sure how this had been arranged, but she was certain. Something had gone wrong. Owen blinked. He looked at Adunola's boarding pass on the armrest. The seat assignment was visible from where he stood. He said, with careful courtesy, that the window seat was assigned to the passenger in seat 4A, and that she appeared to be in seat 4C, which was the aisle. Pamela Croft looked at the boarding pass she pulled from her portfolio. She looked at the overhead seat indicator. A small silence followed of the kind that occurs when someone is determining how to reframe a situation they have decided they don't like. She said that she found these configurations quite confusing and that it was really very poor design, and she opened her portfolio and resumed whatever she had been doing before, the matter apparently closed in her mind, if not in anyone else's. Adunola returned her attention to the presentation on her laptop. She was on slide 14 of 23. The slide concerned projected growth in the cleantech sector through the next decade, and she had a note in the margin from her co-founder, a man named Theo Birch, who had worked with her for 9 years, and who had the useful quality of being willing to tell her when something wasn't landing. That said, the language here is too academic. Punch it up. She was considering the precise nature of that punch when Pamela Croft spoke again. She did not speak to Adunola. She spoke to the woman in the row ahead, turning slightly in her seat with the ease of someone who had no doubt that conversation would be welcome. She was British Columbia herself, she said, though based in Calgary now, had been for almost 20 years, loved the Okanagan, had a property there. The woman ahead, who had the cautious warmth of someone grateful for a distraction from a long flight, said she was visiting her daughter in North Vancouver. They began a conversation about real estate prices, with the enthusiasm of people who have found a shared language. Adunola listened to the edges of this conversation, not because it interested her, but because it was unavoidable, and because she had learned over many years to process background information without losing her thread. The food service began 40 minutes into the flight. Owen moved through the cabin with the cart, and Adunola opened her cooler bag instead, removing the container her assistant had packed, which turned out to be a jerk chicken dish from the Caribbean place on Spadina that Adunola had been ordering from since she was 22 and broke and splitting an order with her roommate because it was the only meal that felt like something other than survival. Pamela Croft looked at the container. Then she looked at Adunola, with an expression of very slightly elevated displeasure. She said nothing for a moment, then picked up the in-flight magazine and fanned it twice toward herself, with the performance of someone finding the air around them unexpectedly compromised. Adunola did not respond. She ate her dinner, read her slides, and did not look up. The descent into Vancouver began 2 hours later. Adunola closed her laptop, tucked it into her bag, and did the small arithmetic of the morning. Car service at 5:45, hotel check-in, 1 hour of review. Breakfast at the Fairmont Pacific Rim, where she had booked the private dining room, because the meeting she was walking into deserved a room that understood what it meant to be walked into seriously. As the plane banked over the city, the lights of Vancouver spread below them in the way that city lights do from altitude. As though the ground had decided to compete with the sky, and was, for a moment, winning. Pamela Croft was already on her feet before the seatbelt sign had fully extinguished, pulling her bag from the overhead with the brisk movements of someone who had somewhere to be, and expected the universe to accommodate that urgency. She caught Adunola with her elbow, the sharp edge of the bag strap catching Adunola's shoulder as she swung it down, and she didn't stop. She said a reflexive sorry into the middle distance that was aimed at no one and meant for no one, already moving toward the forward door. Adunola watched her go. She stood in the private dining room of the Fairmont Pacific Rim at 6:15 the following morning, reviewing the table setup, not because anything would be wrong, but because she had learned early that the details of a space communicate before the people in it do, and she wanted this room to say the right things. She was wearing a charcoal suit she had pressed herself that morning, a habit left over from years when she couldn't afford the cleaners and had never entirely abandoned, and the same watch she had bought herself on the day her first company cleared its first million, which had been a Thursday in November 11 years ago, and which she remembered in the specific detail that mattered moments tend to accumulate. The CTO arrived at 7:15. His name was Raymond Whitford. He was 62 and had spent 30 years in engineering infrastructure and had the dry, lateral humor of someone who had survived enough corporate cycles to find them genuinely funny. He shook Adunola's hand and said that he had heard a great deal about her. She said she had been looking forward to this. They ordered breakfast and talked through the first half of her presentation over coffee, and by 9 o'clock there was the quiet but unmistakable energy of two people who have found their point of agreement and are now simply deciding how to build from it. Raymond leaned back in his chair and said that he wanted to bring two of his technical leads into a follow-up call later that week. He said his board had been watching Adunola's firm for some time, and that this was the conversation he had thought it would be. She thanked him. She was direct. She did not perform gratitude she did not feel. It was in the lobby on the way out, while she was waiting for her car, that she saw Pamela Croft. The recognition was mutual. Pamela was standing near the concierge desk with a compact woman in hotel blazer, speaking with the brisk certainty of someone whose reservation has not been found and who has firm opinions about this. She turned and saw Adunola, and her eyes moved through the small rapid sequence that Adunola recognized. Placement, then correction, then recalibration. She smiled. It was the smile of someone who had decided, somewhere between the plane and this lobby, that the woman she had dismissed last night was possibly a different kind of person than she had originally assessed. She said good morning with a warmth that she had not deployed at 30,000 feet. Adunola said, good morning. Pamela said that she hadn't realized last night that they were both in Vancouver for work. She said she was here for an acquisitions meeting at a firm called Whitford Infrastructure Partners. She said it with the ease of name-dropping, the casual deployment of a name she expected to land. Adunola's car appeared at the entrance behind the glass doors. She said she was familiar with Whitford. Pamela said that she imagined so, that it was quite prominent in its sector, that she had been working toward this meeting for several months. Her tone had acquired a new quality, something approximating collegial, the tone of an equal, addressing an equal in the lobby of a good hotel. Adunola picked up her bag. She said it was a small city, Vancouver. She said she hoped the meeting went well. She said it the way she said most things, with the unhurried precision of someone who means exactly what she says and nothing more. She walked toward the doors. She did not look back. In the car, on the way to the airport for her return flight, she received a message from Raymond Whitford. It was 4 sentences. It said that his executive assistant would send calendar invites for the technical call. It said he had mentioned their breakfast to 2 of his board members on the way out. It said he was looking forward to what they were going to build. The last sentence said that Adunola should let him know if she needed anything before the call. She read the message once. She set the phone face down on the seat beside her. She watched the city through the window for a moment. The ordinary and specific beauty of Vancouver in the early morning, the mountains at the edge of everything, the water catching the low October light. She thought about Pamela Croft in the hotel lobby, recalibrating, reshuffling her assessment of who Adunola was based on information that had always been available and simply ignored. She thought about what it meant that the warmth arrived only when the category changed, only when the context supplied what the person in front of her had never bothered to supply themselves. She had been in enough rooms to understand that this was not unusual. The recalibration almost always came eventually, When the numbers became large enough to be undeniable, when the associations became prominent enough to register. People who had once looked past her had a remarkable capacity, she had found, to reframe their looking as a kind of early-stage discernment. She did not find this particularly interesting anymore. She had not found it interesting for some years. What she found interesting, what had always held her attention more than any of the rooms she had been excluded from, or the rooms she had eventually been welcomed into with revised warmth, was the work, the specific, absorbing, endlessly demanding work of building something real from materials that were not yet a thing, from an idea and capital, and the sustained attention of people who believed in the idea with the same conviction she had brought to it from the beginning. Theo Birch, who had listened to her original pitch in a coffee shop on Bloor Street and said yes before she had finished the deck. The small team, who had worked in a room above a dry cleaner for 2 years because they could not yet afford anything else, and who had brought the same seriousness to that room that they brought to everything that came after. The specific, unrepeatable intelligence of a problem being solved by people who love solving problems. That was what had built what she had built. Not the recalibrations that came later. Not the recalibrations that came later. Not the apologies that arrived once the numbers were public. She picked up her phone and sent Theo a message that said the breakfast went well and that they needed to prepare the technical deck and that she was bringing coffee when she got back. He replied within 30 seconds, which was his way, with a single line that said he had already started. She put the phone away and watched the mountains until the car turned toward the terminal and the mountains became the sky. And the sky became the ordinary business of getting somewhere. At the departures level, she stepped out of the car, took her bag, and walked toward the entrance. The airport had the particular quality of airports early in the morning, purposeful and impersonal, full of people who were all moving in the same direction for completely different reasons. She was flying home. She had work to do. That was, and had always been, enough. There is a version of this story that would have its resolution in the lobby of the Fairmont Pacific Rim in the moment when Pamela Croft recalibrated and offered warmth she had withheld at altitude. There is a version where the vindication is the point, where the arc bends toward the satisfaction of being finally seen. But that version mistakes the recalibration for the thing that matters. The thing that matters is not what happens when someone else updates their assessment of you. The thing that matters is what you were building while they were busy deciding what category to put you in. Adunola Briggs-Ose had been building for 20 years, in rooms that wanted her gone, and in rooms that opened reluctantly, and in rooms she had built herself from the ground up. What she had made from that work was not a lesson for anyone, not a vindication, not a story about one flight and one lobby and one woman who looked past her and then had cause to look again. It was simply a company that had changed the infrastructure of how 3 Canadian provinces managed their energy transitions. A team of 64 people who came to work because the work was worth coming to, and a meeting in Vancouver that had gone exactly as well as she had expected it to. Because she had done the preparation and the preparation was sound. None of that had anything to do with what Pamela Croft thought of her on a plane at 30,000 feet. None of it ever had.